Hello, comrades. We're going to carry on from where we left. We finished the first part of our discussion about developments after 1945, and we arrived at 1953. So, section 2 of the discussion or our talk. After 1953, all economic laws of socialism began to be undermined and not applied in the USSR and people's democracies. This has invariably led to outright restoration of capitalism in 1990s. Date of dissolution of USSR, 26 December 1991. In the meantime, until 1990s, this has led to the weakening of the socialist countries, to their unification with the world capitalist market in the fashion of Yugoslavia, but not exactly like Yugoslavia. This has also led to the dissolution of the socialist market, it becoming part and parcel of the world capitalist market, and thus being affected by its general crisis, just as Trotsky has wished decades ago. USSR was such a developed socialist country that its dissolution, and thus the dissolution of and full integration of the socialist market around it, took decades to organize. The non-application of the economic laws of socialism, and thus inevitable crisis of economic life of USSR and people's democracies, its ever-increasing dependence on USA and other imperialist countries, coupled with their political integration to world imperialist order, was the main reason for the destruction of communism. Note 7. Destruction of East European people's democracies and USSR at the end of 1980s and beginning of 1990s is not due to their economies not being able to survive as of old, but because they have become part and parcel of the world capitalist market and subservient to USA-UK. And the USA-UK dominated world capitalist market needed a new adjustment to be able to carry on. Destruction of the economies of these countries was considered necessary and useful and doable, and thus it was done. Their productive capacity was thus destroyed to the tune of 70+%, and only thus could they be integrated into the capitalist world market. End of note. But this was not all. USSR and people's democracies has begun the process of supporting the so-called independent countries that came to form the non-aligned movement. A lot of projects that helped establish capitalism and thus the capitalist world market was provided to these countries. This was propagated as the infamous non-capitalist road of development. Thus, these countries were provided by means of developing capitalism at the expense of socialist countries and at the expense of building socialism, communism in the USSR and people's democracies. These countries were thus indirectly able to support the world imperialist capitalist order better. These countries were also provided with plenty of armaments by USSR and people's democracies. Thus, world capitalism that was forced to armaments and wars to solve its problems were provided political and material means of war-making by these restorers of capitalism in USSR and people's democracies. Thus, so-called socialist countries such as Yugoslavia, Cuba, Korea, Vietnam, and more, Ethiopia, Afghanistan, etc., were all used as a deep pool of expenditure that did not help build socialism in those countries, did not build socialism in these countries, but most certainly helped misuse the potential of our motherland and people's democracies, and to their diversion away from building of socialism, communism. Notes 8, 9, and 10. Note 8. It is well known that Tito, the Trotskyite, declared USSR an imperial power and people's democracies as countries dependent on this imperialist power. Note that this Yugoslavia was passed on to USSR by USA as regards provision of military equipment, military projects, and all sorts of credits. Thus, this idea of social imperialism of USSR originates first in Trotsky and later is pushed forward by Tito. It is later on taken up by China and Albania and others. Was USSR an imperial power between 1953 and 91? No, it was not. It was a power that was busy restoring capitalism in the USSR and people's democracies and helped destroy the world communist movement. It was a power busy getting rid of the second parallel market, the socialist market, and organizing the convergence of this market into the world capitalist market. All the activities of USSR and people's democracies, including China and Albania, as well as the communist parties going along with these restorers of capitalism and destroyers of the socialist world market, is to be taken first and most of all as activities to restore capitalism and destroy the world socialist market, and thus world communism. It is thus that these activities of these states are not imperialistic or domination orientated. It is restoration orientated. Were the policies of USSR and people's democracies, including China and Albania, social imperialist policies? Yes, they were, but not in the sense that as countries they were imperialists. It was social imperialists in the sense that they were adapters to world imperialism, to world domination of USA and the UK, as traitors to communism and thus to world proletariat, as active participants in the organization of the domination of the world by imperialism, which is dominated by USA and UK. Note 9. Due to the fact that USSR and people's democracies were extremely developed industrially and were such modern nations, and the world capitalist market was so narrow, incapable of absorbing the productive potential of these countries in the world capitalist market in a capitalistic way, that these countries were slowly run down. Even then, they could not run them down industrially. They, through economic and social means, made life difficult for the people in the midst of all that industrial development. And only when they felt they could really destroy them without much comeback, and when they needed it to manage the world economy, did they took the step to destroy these countries, well and good, with the cooperation of Trotskyite traitors in power. Take note that even today, even after all the subservient positions, Russian monopoly capitalism is not being accepted into the world capitalist economic relations. For even now, after all the destruction, if Russian capitalism is not controlled and kept weak, if it is allowed to trade as a normal part of the world capitalist market, it would extremely speedily become a producer of plenty of high quality machines and all sorts of products. The days of Trotsky, when Russia restored to capitalism thanks to a Trotsky government, could be kept as a simple raw material producer and nothing more, is no longer doable. Present-day Trotskyites, Putin and company, cannot do it, however much they may want to do. On the one hand, world capitalism cannot turn Russia of 140 million into a Norway as a country that is a raw material producing and living relatively well. On the other, Russia, in spite of all the transfer of goods and trained people, all Soviet wealth to imperialists, is still heavily industrial, heavily working class, well trained at that society. It must be controlled, not allowed to function as a capitalist country freely. Even China, the source of cheap products for the imperialist world, this helping colonial China that was to feed the imperial world with cheap products, in less than 40 years of utterly and totally dependent development of capitalism that is integrated to the world imperialism, is turning into a problem that needs to be controlled. They must be saying, better leave it on its own, stuck in the past, part of world capitalism, but without any integration to the world capitalist system. But it has been lost to them. Here is your Russia, here is your China, and here let us see what you can. Your India is on its way too. World imperialism has too much technology and too many possible sources of power with their nuclear bombs and all. Note 10. The so-called space program used to declare the might of USSR must be seen as another means of misdirecting our potentials, together with the so-called armament industry. One should also take note of Hollywood-style cult of the individual, perpetrated around the astronauts, and through them around the political leaders, such as Khrushchev. Similarities with the USA's cult of the individual, formed through Hollywood, magazines, etc., must be noted. Celebrity culture is indeed the cult culture. Take note that swinging 60s of the West became possible thanks to swinging 50s of USSR and people's democracies. End of notes. It should be seen as diversion of the movement away from building socialism, communism, not only in the USSR and people's democracies around it, but also in those so-called socialist countries that are supposed to be objecting to them in a radical way, such as China. For a study of their history clearly reveals that they all have one commonality, one thing in common. That commonality, one thing in common, is the fight against Lenin-Stalin plan of building socialism, communism, and an application of Tito Trotsky method of building socialism, which is nothing but restoration of capitalism. It is thus that so-called revolutionary movements were also used to divert our movement away from proletarian class struggle, from communism. And their victory, such as in Cuba, was used not only to put up a revolutionary facet for the outright restorers of capitalism, but also to divert the world movement towards petty bourgeois adventurism. An expenditure in those countries by the USSR and other people's democracies, by those traitors to communism in collaboration with their traitorous comrades in those countries, was declared to be a way of building socialism. A la Tito, a la Trotsky. Many ways of building socialism were practiced so long as they are opposed to Lenin-Stalin way of building socialism, communism. These ways of building socialism were nothing but ways of restoration of capitalism. Note 11. No one should be taken in by the anti-Trotskyite garbage that they have produced, as well as anti-Tito garbage that they have produced. You will see not one objection to the fact that Lenin-Stalin plan of building socialism, communism have been trampled underfoot, that they themselves are engaged in this undermining, that they, in their own way, have been adapting Tito way of different forms of building socialism. No one should be taken in by all the talk of people's state as opposed to proletarian dictatorship. For whoever saw a proletarian dictatorship that actually is engaged not in building socialism, but in restoring capitalism, not adapting Lenin-Stalin plan of building socialism in their concrete conditions, but coming up with their other ways of building socialism a la Tito. End of note. Section 3. The diversion of socialist countries away from building socialism and communism towards restoration of capitalism, and thus the division, USSR versus China, and the orientation of socialist market towards world imperialist market, towards recreating one and indivisible world capitalist market, this beloved all-powerful market of Trotsky, have helped all capitalist countries to unite around USA and United Kingdom. They have all become subservient to USA. They were and are ruled by national traitors, while socialist countries were going out of their way to become subservient to USA. Note 12. We all know why Cuba is suffering. It is all because of USA's embargo. Not because of the socialist market was destroyed, not because socialism in the USSR and people's democracies were destroyed, not because they themselves did not build socialism. If only USA would lift the embargo. Such bourgeois ideas was rarely expressed in our movement. It is now the norm for traitors of all sorts who are supposed to represent our movement. End of note. After 1953, all agreed to accept USA dollar and the UK sterling as the money is called standard. Instead of USA selling its products to Germany, France, Italy, Japan, and others, they all began producing and selling to USA and UK, either through money borrowed from these, through finances provided by these, and or through the production and trading facilities established by these in Germany, France, Italy, and others of Europe and Japan. All was done using dollars and sterlings, which USA and UK could simply print. But all around, domination belonged to the USA and dollar. It is thus that USA was able to build bases all over the world and formed armed forces second to none. and fought wars to defend the imperial system for all. This system of USA, putting in paper and getting dollar, and that dollar being gold denominated, 1 ounce of gold, 28.35 grams, being $24, and buying all that they produced and they built, all their productive capacity using dollars from USA. And in spite of all the support given to the imperial system by USSR and people's democracies while trying to restore capitalism, came to an end in the beginning of 1970s, 20 years at most after Stalin. Note 13. The roaring 60s, as it was called in Europe and USA, these good times in these countries coincide with extremes of poverty in colonial countries, with wars in colonial countries, and with the support of USSR and people's democracies to them. And it follows the roaring 50s in USSR and people's democracies. End of note. It is thus that Germans asked for their gold at the beginning of the 70s. Here are all the dollars we have accumulated, selling things to you. Give us gold. 1 ounce of gold for $24. And here Nixon, USA, told them where to go. USA said no. 1 ounce of gold gone up to over $1,000 and barely stabilized around $750. This in 1970s. That was the end of Bretton Woods and gold standard of dollar. Imagine how many years the whole world fed USA with goods using that dollar. That was to be 1 ounce of gold equals $24. It was a nice setup that one prints paper in green, calls it dollar, and they all can't get enough of it to give you all sorts of machines, raw materials, lands for military bases, soldiers, and food. Monopoly is good for some. Did the capitalist world and the world of restorers of capitalism thus put an end to the monopoly of USA dollar? No, they did not. It was replaced by what is called the petrodollars, and the agreement that dollar should be the international means of trade and reserve money by all was kept, while the price of gold was to be determined by the market for gold. Take note that the gold market was also monopolized by USA and UK, who hold the gold of many developing countries. It is Bank of England. Venezuelans cannot get their gold back from England these days. Such is law-abiding capitalism of the monopolists. Neither can Germany get their gold from USA. Saudis and other oil-rich Arab countries loaded with dollars were not allowed to accumulate gold and silver. They were not allowed to buy huge amounts of these in the world market. Dollar is what you will have, they were told, and spend it as we tell you. This dollar domination is directly related to the domination of the financial activities by USA and hand in hand with them by UK. Note 14. The so-called nationalization of oil by OPEC countries was not and is not a project oil-rich countries, but a USA-UK project. Thereby, the dollar accumulated in Germany, etc., were forced into paying for oil. Thus, they had to spend their accumulated dollars to buy oil instead of demanding gold for it. This made oil-rich countries rich, dollar-rich, and the dollar is controlled by USA. Take note that if one wants to sell oil, one has to use dollar. End of note. It is only nowadays that this dollar domination of oil trade and oil-rich countries having lots of dollars that they do not know how to spend is being challenged. Ever so slight. It is very much related to the overall problem of world system dominated by USA UK. This is leading to and will lead to changes in the relationships of oil-rich countries and USA UK. Israel will also go through some changes in its relationships. Only nowadays are we seeing a half-hearted attempt to put an end to this monopoly of USA dollar and their financial activities. Note 15. Lenin noted that commodity production, a simple commodity production, comes to this world together with usury. The days of beginning of slavery. That the developed commodity production in the form of monopoly capitalism is going to end as a huge, monstrous, worldwide form of usury applied to monopolist banks and financial services industry. The scope of present-day usury, dominated by USA and UK, participated by France, Germany, Japan, Italy, Sweden, etc., is so huge that it is about to devour all participants. It is thus that USA, UK are trying to devour all others through usury, so that they are not devoured by the whole system of usury they have created. The debt owned by some amounts to $180 trillion. What can they do with all that money if those debts are paid back to these people who own these debts? Their market is already saturated, where people are starving and being killed in wars. The world capitalist system of usury is well and truly stuck. End of note. Monopoly of USA dollar is not the only monopoly bestowed upon USA by the world financial oligarchs and by the world bourgeois and feudals. These enemies of the nations of the world and these enemies of democracy and peace. B. They have been given a monopoly in the control of raw materials. Oil is well known, but also almost all metals. This is Mrs. Thatcher's infamous our oil and car economy, if you like. Oil from USA, UK, cars from others. They have been given a monopoly in trade of almost all what is called commodities: coffee, chocolate, wheat, sugar, orange juice, etc. USA on its own, but particularly together with UK, have monopoly in all these things. They control both the production and the sale of all these things. Or they control the production of these things through their monopoly of the trade in these things. Metal exchange, commodity exchange, and the futures in all these commodities are monopolized by USA and UK, thanks to their monopoly of dollar and financial activities all over the world. Only nowadays are we seeing a half-hearted attempt to put an end to this monopoly, and this attempt is again very much part of the changes the whole world system of USA UK domination, the world capitalist system is going through. See, they, particularly USA, have been given a monopoly in computerization. So much so that so-called dot-com bubble that burst must be seen as a means of transferring funds to USA to establish its monopoly in this sphere. Software monopoly and the infamous intellectual property rights bestowed upon them have transferred quite a lot to USA. I mean, what is the real value of all those software companies, such as Microsoft? It would be almost nothing without the monopoly agreed by all. This is followed by the monopoly in the cyberspace, that is internet. All those companies, such as Facebook, they would not be worth the paper they are written on, is worth the earth. And you shall not find many producers trying to challenge Intel as regards the production of the microchips that make all the computerization possible. Note 16. Reader should take note of the restorers of capitalism, particularly in this sphere. The second production facility in the world that could produce computers, not using microchips, was built in USSR in 1952. Many processes were fully automated using this ability by 1956. Then comes an end to computerization and automation. Thus, monopoly in this field is left to the USA. Computerization that would have made automation and thus production of plenty possible is refused. Computerization that would have made planning so easy and direct and thus transition to communism so easy was refused, as well as whole planning administration being turned into a yo-yo, and thus the application of the economic laws of socialism being made impossible. Restorers of capitalism did not want the fact that they were taking the economy down a blind alley of capitalist restoration to become so easily and readily observed, and they certainly did not want to achieve plenty through automation of all, and thus transformation of all property to communal property based on plenty. No wonder they objected to product exchange and got stuck on commodity exchange. No wonder they objected to automation of production using computerization and to computerization of planning. And take note, you shall not see a single defender of proletarian dictatorship, of revolution, of revolutionary violence, ever touching such unpleasant issues as computerization that directly relate to the fact of not building modern proletarian socialism, communism, either in USSR and people's democracies or in their own countries. But the talk of revolution is cheap and plenty. End of the note. D. It is thus that they have been given a monopoly in military power, including secret intelligence services. One should, of course, never forget the special relationship of UK with USA in military and intelligence activities, and especially one should never forget the Five Eyes that sees and hears, all made up of USA, UK, and UK-controlled Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Monopoly in computerization, internet, and all forms of communication related to this is central to the present-day intelligence activities and military activities dominated by USA, UK, by their Five Eyes. E. All these monopolies is confounded by the USA, UK monopoly of culture and ethics through American cosmopolitanism. Talk about cult of the individual. This culture revolves around the cult of the individual who become rich and famous thanks to this cult culture. These celebrities of art and literature, of media of all kinds, of science and politics, of moneymakers, the rich and famous. Even the military and royalty are part of this. Don't be surprised if all the spies come out and demand a bit of that fame and fortune for themselves. This culture of gangsters, this culture of mass murder stories, this culture of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, this outright degeneration of the society, where honor and honest work is frowned upon, where war makers are not criminals who are committing crimes against humanity, but heroes of novels and papers and big screen and small screen. The war propagandists are not criminals committing crimes against humanity, but writers and anchormen and all that. Where they who make science and technology to produce bigger and bigger, better and better killing facilities for the mass murderers pass for scientists. Where prostitution is defended by the prostitute as her, and not to forget his, right to choose. And anyone who wants to put an end to it is killed by the prostitute in defense of her right to be a prostitute. Oh yes, that was a part of a TV drama series. Russian prostitute did it. There, those who come up with economic policies that starve millions are honored as the best economists. The makers of war are honored as peacemakers by, say, Nobel Prizes. And all take part in this monopoly of cosmopolitan culture and ethics. And here too, USA, UK lead the way and dominate their willing, subservient partners. Thus comes to an end of our talk about the restorers and their masters, the USA, UK-led imperialists. We shall carry on talking about other issues related to restoration of capitalism in the USSR next week, comrades. Good day to you.